We are streamed through the Better Sports Network. I'm Dan Malin, and I am joined, as always, by the FSWA three-time NASCAR Writer of the Year, Matt. How you doing? We have Gateway this weekend. It's the second time that the Cup Series has ever run here. Plenty of experience for a lot of these truck drivers, but what are we expecting this weekend after a very eventful and wet weekend in Charlotte last week?
Yeah, last weekend was a very long weekend, right? Like rain all over the place. Then the Xfinity race got split into two parts with a
Yeah.
whole other race running between it, which I don't think I've ever seen before. Yeah, it was interesting in the end. I thought it was a phenomenal race throughout the entire 600. There wasn't really any boring part to it.
No.
And Blaney gets off the schneid. So, congrats to him. I think that's the third driver to end a 50-plus winless streak this year. So Stenhouse was at almost 200 races when he won at Daytona, by the way. This weekend, look, St. Louis Gateway is quickly becoming a favorite track of mine. It puts a lot of stuff in drivers' hands. There was actually passing here last year, despite what we want to believe. And I don't think weather's going to be an issue. So
my only concern, and I do have a few for the slate, which I'll pick your brain about how we should approach certain things. But the first thing I'm worried about is that they qualified at roughly I think 9 to 10 a.m. local time.
Yeah,
when
it's
the
going to be
temps
a
are a little
different
bit
track when they race.
Yeah. It's going to be scorching hot tomorrow from a
Yeah.
lot of the forecasts that I've seen.
And they're going to be racing mid-afternoon, which is the hottest time of the day,
right.
Especially out here in the Midwest. So, yeah, it's going to change some things up. Look, we can't assume, you have to take what we saw on the track today, right? But it is a concern of mine that, what we saw on the track isn't going to necessarily match because cars are going to be a little looser. The track is going to race different, right? It's going to have a little less grip. Maybe tires wear a little more. So who knows on that front?
Let me ask you this. So in last year's race, the fastest cars in practice and qualifying pretty much translated to the top 10, top 15 finishing order for the race.
Right.
Even Eric Jones was up there, I think, last year. Are we expecting relatively should we expect that to play out the same way as well? Because if you look at, I have DraftKings pulled up. I did not get to see practice and qualifying. I've had issues with my cable provider all day. But I'm seeing a lot of these guys in the 9K range and even in the 10K range. Naturally, they're priced up for a reason, and they did qualify pretty well, save for Christopher Bell and Kyle Larson. Should we expect a lot of the top 15 to go largely unchanged? And do we kind of just know who's going to be fast here based on practice and qualifying?
I would say we could see some shuffling. I think some guys who had some bad qualifying runs ran better in practice than qualifying is giving him credit for. Like, for example, Alex Bowman starting 18th, he was a top 5 car. The longer he stayed on the track, the car got faster. Larson never seemed to have the right setup, so I'm a little intrigued as to what we're going to do with him.
Qualified outside the top 20. That's very weird for him.
Yeah, he also went out for a run in practice and then didn't like the feel of his car and brought it back in. And by the time they got it back out on track, half of practice had gone after he made adjustments. So
nice.
It's one of those things where if you miss a lot on the setup, you're not going to get a whole lot of track time. Keselowski gets an extra right tire because there was a defect in one of his that basically blew off the car in 7 laps. That was not a car issue. It was not a tire pressure issue. It was a defective tire. So I don't think we're going to see very many of those. Just tossing that out there.
All right. So Gateway is about a 1.2, 1.25 mile flat track. It's shaped similar to Darlington, but it's much flatter. It doesn't have the banking or the extremely high tire wear that Darlington has. But correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that NASCAR is running a different aero package in this year's race. They're running the intermediate package. I think they were in the short track package last year, right?
Correct. They're in the intermediate package this year, which is fantastic because all of the passing we've seen this year has happened in the intermediate package. The short track package has been not good. But they are bringing the same tire combination as we've seen on at Phoenix and Richmond and New Hampshire and here last year. To give you an idea of what NASCAR is comping this to, it's basically Richmond and Phoenix and New Hampshire. You can toss a little bit of Martinsville in, not a ton. You can kind of look a little bit at road courses because it's a rhythm setup here. So guys that can get in a rhythm and hit their braking spots and keep doing the same line after line after line on the per lap can make up ground here. But again, the main comps are Phoenix, Richmond, and New Hampshire.
All right. What kind of, based on how practice and qualifying shook out, and because this is still a relatively new track for the Cup Series, just running for the second year in the new next gen car, are you okay playing cash games, or is this a GPP only slate for you?
I'm okay playing cash games. I think there's some PD spots available. There's a few chalkier plays based on pricing and who's in what cars and how they did in qualifying and whatnot. So there is a little bit of chalk out there. You could see the guys starting up front just run away and hide a little bit at the beginning of the race. But we'll see, because again, the weather may change up how the track is. So you might see some guys who start up front drift back and then come back to the pack once it starts to cool down a little bit, or they make adjustments on the car. But yeah, I'd be fine with, I'm still doing mostly GPPs, but I'm fine with getting some cash game builds put together.
I think I've gone back and forth on how I feel about this race, mostly because the new package is a little bit concerning. The fact that they're going to be racing with a lot more heat than what they qualified on. I've personally had my issues getting a read on just how to approach it, and I'm normally a guy that likes to do 4 or 20 lineups in the $4 Chrome Horn. I don't even know if I'm gonna do that. I might still do 20 lineups, but throw them in the happy hour since that's just a $1 per entry contest. So for me, you seem a little more confident in your read on the race. But one question I do have is that, I know for a track like this where we're going to get over 200 laps, what is this, 240 laps total?
243, I believe, is the lap count for 300.
Okay. So my next question is, last year's race, we saw 6 different drivers lead 20 laps. Do you think it's likely or possible that we see that again, or should we see something along more of the norm of, a 1A dominator, a 1B dominator, and maybe a couple other guys that, collect dominator points along the way?
No, I think we'll see multiple guys lead chunks of laps here. A couple reasons. One, we've already seen that happen multiple times in the intermediate package this year, right? Not to comp it to Charlotte, because Charlotte had 400 laps, but it took forever to get somebody over 100 laps led in that race, right? We had a bunch of comers and goers. Even at places like Phoenix and Richmond, yeah, sure, we had one guy over 100, but we had another, 3 or 4 guys cracking the 20, 25 lap led barriers at those tracks. So I would say early on, we might see one guy lead a good chunk of the first stage, but then after that, and people get adjusted to the track and get all their adjustments in, we're really going to see some racy situations in the second, third stage. So if you want early laps led, the guys starting out front are probably your best bet. Whether they hold on to that throughout the whole lead or the whole race, I don't know. Look, Kyle Busch ran the fastest qualifying lap out there, right? He put it in the 32.7s, I think is what he ran. It was pretty
for his qualifying lap, I thought it was like I thought it was sub 30. Maybe I'm wrong.
30. It was whatever it was in the 7s. Whatever everybody else was, he was like a 10th of a second faster.
Yeah.
But so he may run out and hide a little bit at the first stage, but I would suspect that the field will come back to him. I don't think he's going to go and lead 150 something plus laps tomorrow.
Would you be okay playing him in cash games just because we can assume he's going to get those early dominator points?
I would say so. I mean, look, the 8 car was pretty reasonably quick here last year as well. Obviously, different driver. Kyle Busch is more skilled than Tyler Reddick at this point. So if you're
Not
putting
to
them
mention
together,
Bush last year, granted he was with JGR, but he led 66 laps, had
right,
46 fastest laps, and finished second.
right. So it's not like he had a schlubby day. He was like battling it out with Logano in that whole third stage last year for some excellent racing. So yeah, I would assume that Kyle Busch would be playable in cash. I don't think. Look, he's under 10 grand on DK.
Yeah.
So getting a pole sitter on a relatively short track under 10 grand is basically a gift.
Now let's talk about Team Penske real quick. Pretty much in this package all year long, they were brutal. And the weather conditions did help them last week. Austin Cindric, I'm pretty sure he got caught in a wreck at Charlotte. Before he wrecked, he was having a really good run. He was top 15, but mostly a top 20 car. Joey Logano was up in the top 5 at times, but then he kind of drifted back. But ultimately, it was the Ryan Blaney show at Charlotte. And all three of those drivers, Blaney qualified P2, Logano is P6, Cindric, I believe, is P10. Yes, he qualified P10. Do we expect them, I guess, to carry over the success from last week, or do we see them kind of come back down to reality and maybe be some drivers that could just blow up if we decide to maybe take advantage of what they showed last week?
Well, so that's the interesting part about this track, right? It's the intermediate package, which we've known that the Fords have struggled in the intermediate package due to aero and whatever this year at the bigger tracks. But this is a kind of track where the aero doesn't necessarily matter quite as much because it races more like a short track. It's flat. It's 1.25 miles, so it's shorter than Darlington. It's a little longer than New Hampshire. It's a little longer than Phoenix, and we saw what the Fords did at Phoenix, right? Let's not forget that Logano won this race last year. So I think they're in a good spot because they're at a track where it's a package that fits their drivers' driving styles, but they're not handicapped by the aero that's on that package. If that makes sense. So
No, it does.
I think they've got a boost from doing so well at Charlotte, and Logano certainly has confidence because he won this race here last year.
He's always been kind of the king of that guy that can go out and win on a track for the very first time.
Yep.
One team that pretty much everybody expects to be fast and be really good here this week is going to be Joe Gibbs Racing. They have really kind of closed the gap and, if anything, surpassed Hendrick Motorsports in general as a team in terms of just showing up, having speed every week, qualifying well, running well, and finishing well as well. And Denny Hamlin and Martin Truex Jr. are both over $10,000 on DraftKings. They are starting P3 and P5 respectively. Christopher Bell is actually the most expensive driver of the three. He's 10-7 on DraftKings, but he is starting P17. And way down the list at 7,800, he's discounted this week. We do have Ty Gibbs starting P15. I'm just kind of expecting all these cars to be fast this week, and I was actually overweight on Ty Gibbs last week. I was really bummed out that he didn't finish with the speed that he had because I know he was caught in a wreck. I mean, I thought that was like easily a top 10 car, potentially top 5. Plenty of faith in Joe Gibbs Racing this week, assuming that all of them should show up.
Yeah. Look, Denny had the best long run car in practice. He's also got the mojo of thriving off the hate from Chase Elliott fans. He seems to thrive off of when people really dislike him. Thanks, by the way, for ruining his own bracket by calling for Chase Elliott to be out for one of the key races in his bracket. But yeah, I mean, Ty Gibbs has just been Mr. Consistent over the last several races here. He's just kept his head down, not gotten involved in any of the shenanigans we saw in the Xfinity series from him last year. Christopher Bell has, I mean, there's not a bad word you could say about that guy other than he hasn't won more than he
should,
right? And Truex is always in play at the shorter, flatter tracks. Like, they should be good. Toyotas as a whole should be good here. This is a track that fits what they typically do well. That goes for 2311 as well. We've seen Bubba. If you include the All-Star race, he's got 4 straight top fives going. Reddick is starting to put it like I don't know what to make of Reddick at this point. Basically, like he did well in the Cup 600, right?
Him and Bubba both finished top 5.
But he seems to be like I can't tell if he's putting it together or this is just another flash of him putting it together before it comes back down to earth a little bit again. I don't know. He's been tricky this year.
I mean, if he's not going to put it together this week, we can probably assume he'll put it together next week since he is kind of become the road course king in the Cup Series.
I mean, yeah, right? Like, Sonoma's right up his alley.
Yeah. All right. So in this low 10K range, upper 9K range, I know we've talked about some of these guys already, Martin Truex Jr., Ryan Blaney, and Kyle Busch specifically. But below them, we do have Ross Chastain, 9,600. I would like to talk about him just because ever since he was called out by basically Rick Hendrick for driving too aggressively,
he sucked.
Yeah, he hasn't been very good. He was awful at North Wilkesboro.
Yeah.
I mean, granted, he finished 11th, but I thought he would be better. And then last week, started 14th. I was very heavy on him in my Chrome Horn lineups, and
he never really was
not
he
a
racing?
single dominator. Yeah, it was like he was always running just outside the top 20. Didn't have a single dominator point.
Yeah.
And for 10,100, that was an incredibly disappointing performance. But we do have Blaney, Busch, Chastain, Logano, Reddick, Harvick. Aside from Blaney and Busch, we've talked about. So we're talking Chastain, Logano, Reddick, Harvick. Who do you expect to, I guess, be the dark horse contender to maybe dominate or at least get some laps led?
Harvick.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know why people are still down on Harvick. Like everything that touches the Ford camp or SHR never affects Kevin Harvick. Like he just keeps showing up, and he's been sneaky fast for a while now. He may not have all of the results that would lead you to believe that, but if you actually watched it or you look at green flag speed or whatever, they're pretty quick. He's pretty quick again. He ran decently well here last year before he had an issue late in the race and was actually credited with like a 34th place finish or something, but he was running better than that before he wrecked out. I think there was a tire issue. So yeah, I think Kevin Harvick is the dark horse. I mean, people are going to look at Reddick, go, well, he ran well last year here. The 45 car that he's in finished third here last year. Chastain was great until he got double teamed by Hamlin and Chase Elliott all over the place in the second half of the race here last year. This is when Hamlin chased him all the way down to the infield grass and then slowed him way down in turn one. Logano won, so it's not like I don't think he really counts as a dark horse at this point. So I'm going to go with Harvick. I just think the guy, look, he's got 7 top 10s this year, which puts him in the top, few people with that. And again, it's under the radar. Like, does anybody realize that the guy's finished top 10 that many times?
Right. Below them in this mid 8K range, and as we descend into the value range, we are starting to find some PD options, place differential. Alex Bowman is 8,600. Still seems a little too cheap, just given what we saw, and Blake Harris has just been a phenomenal addition to that team and organization. Bubba Wallace on the backs of 4 straight top 5 finishes is only 8,400, starting P20. You got Brad Keselowski and Chris Buescher in this range as well, and RFK is finding speed, as I already mentioned. My love for Ty Gibbs this week, but then we get Corey LaJoie, who is 7,400. Starting P30, and he is in the 9 car for Chase Elliott this week. And this is something that I was very excited to hear about, just for him personally, because I know he's wanted an opportunity in great equipment. And sure, this is only going to be like a one race deal, but it is an opportunity for him to drive really solid equipment. I wish it came on a track that he probably had more familiarity with. But at the end of the day, this is the best equipment he's ever had, 7,400, and he's starting P30. I mean, you and I discussed before the podcast started, he really only needs to finish 18th to hit that 5x value on DraftKings. But what are you doing in this range this week? Who might be your favorite play, and what are you doing specifically with Corey LaJoie? Because I've already said, if he's going to be chalk at this price and starting where he is in that car, I'd rather just be underweight and hope that he doesn't reach that ceiling.
Yeah, my favorite play in this range is Alex Bowman. I love me some Bowman this week. In the Grover's Grill short that's coming out with me and Ed Rouse, I took Alex Bowman top 10 finish prop in that one. It was going off at even money at BetMGM, which anytime you're getting positive odds is a good thing. He's finished like 9th, 8th, and 11th at the shorter tracks this year. I had concerns about his back heading into last week.
Right.
No concerns now. He and his car held up very, very well over the entire 600 miles. It was a strong showing from him.
Plus, this one's only 300 miles. It's literally half the distance of last
Exactly.
year.
And he ran well here last year. So, yeah, I don't really understand why he's 8,600. Not to mention, he may be the least owned Hendrick driver this week.
Yeah, you're probably right.
I think Byron and Larson get owned more because they're Byron and Larson, right? Because you got Larson starting 20th, so now he's got PD, and if he makes it to the front, he could always lead laps. Byron is starting 7th, which is where Logano started last year when he won the thing, and he's been really good at these shorter, flatter tracks, right? Even though he wasn't that great here last year. He did get faster in practice when he realized he was running a different line than everybody else, right? And LaJoie, I think everybody's taking LaJoie because he doesn't cost you basically anything. You're getting the 9 car for essentially free. And all he's got to do is move up and finish basically at his average finish for this year, which is 19.1, and he hits value.
Yeah.
So I think Bowman might be the least owned Hendrick driver on the slate this week, which is weird to say. Buescher, I really quite like. I still don't get why Briscoe's like all the odds love Briscoe this week, and I can't figure it out. Now he's priced above a guy who's been running better than him all year.
And his crew chief is suspended.
He, as PJ Walsh said, it's going to take him 5 years at this pace to make up the 120.
Yeah, I saw that. That's absolutely wild.
Yeah, Mike Joy said basically if he wins this year and finishes, and qualifies for the playoffs, he would then have to win every single round to advance because he doesn't have the playoff points to make up for it.
Yeah, he's not doing that.
And by the way, even when they were cheating, they were still only beating BJ McLeod by 3 spots. So, I don't understand why Bubba is longer odds for a top 5 and to win than Briscoe is in the books. I don't know. So I am not playing Briscoe. Sorry. If it bites me, it bites me. I had zero faith in him before, and now I have even less.
How many times has not playing Chase Briscoe really bit you in DFS though? Maybe Phoenix last year.
I mean, maybe Phoenix last year. That's about it. It's like the Cole Custer Kentucky race, right? That was the only time. I don't know what to do with LaJoie. I think he's going to be really highly owned in cash. You might be suckered into having to play him.
Oh, I think in cash games, yeah, you can easily lock him in. That's just going to be an ownership play because he'll probably be
right. Because if he doesn't do anything,
then he's hurting everybody in the field, and who cares?
Then he's hurting everybody in the field, so you don't lose anything. And if he does go off and you don't have him, you can't make it up.
Sure.
So that's the downside there. My gut is telling me not to play Almirola, but my head is telling me he ran well here. This is his style of track. And SHR has to flip the news cycle to have a good day.
Yeah. I forget who it was, though, but I think it was Greg Mathern on Twitter. He retweeted somebody who had a chart of the practice speeds and all that stuff. And highlighted in blue was pretty much every driver that had the better track conditions.
Right.
And then the drivers that were not highlighted, Eric Almirola was actually the best of the drivers that had the worst track conditions. And he was actually top 10. Yeah, he was top 10 in 5, 10, 15 lap metrics. And so, and he's good on flat tracks historically.
He ran 8th here last year.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Priest I kind of like, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, you're especially in comparison to Almirola, like you're getting more PD, and you're in general just getting the discount. I am kind of curious.
Or 2 straight, if you actually count races, he has 2 straight top 15s and 3 top 17s in the last 4 races. Priest does.
Not bad. It is worth mentioning that Todd Gilliland at 5,600. Sorry if I'm appearing sounding like I'm rushing. It's just we only have a few minutes left. But Gilliland is back in the 38 car, 5,600 starting P28. I just assume he's going to be the popular value option for tournaments and cash games.
Probably. I mean, you could toss Justin Haley in there. You could toss Michael McDowell in there.
I'm so hesitant to play McDowell, though, because he just hasn't been as good. It's been a pretty rough stretch for McDowell.
He ran well in practice, though. I do have to give him that. But it has been a rough stretch for him.
What are you doing with Carson Hocever, who was in the 7 car for Corey LaJoie this week?
I'm not playing him.
No, he's got more experience on this track than everybody in the field.
Yeah, but he's racing a cup car for the first time. And he just, like, I saw his practice interview, and he looked like a kid that was just happy to be there.
Yeah, that 6'4" happy child. But my thing is like I'm always not sure what to do when we get first timers in the next gen car, because Zane Smith I think had the same deal here last year, and if I recall, I think he was top 15. I don't think he was top 10 though.
Yeah, that's true. But Ben Rhodes, on the other hand, wrecked AJ Allmendinger's car in practice and was never allowed in the garage again. So, and Allmendinger took that car from 35th to 10th without having practiced it or ever been at the track. I don't know. I mean, I guess out of the group that's like Gilliland and Hocevar are certainly the top 2 guys that are appealing under the 57 price tag, but like now we're talking dumpster diving because obviously McLeod.
Oh, I could throw out JJ Yaley.
He did have a good race last week. I got to give you that.
He hasn't been all that bad. I think it was Kansas. He even finished 23rd, and he started 35th, and like that was 31 fantasy points, and like he's still under $5,000. And
I mean, he picked up
short
600 last week.
Yeah, and you always have to count, like when we preview or predict or try to analyze the Coke 600, is that like you can just be in the worst equipment, and you're like there will be good cars that wreck out, and you just have to survive and finish. You can finish multiple laps down and still be optimal. But do you have any final thoughts before we wrap it up? We've got a couple minutes left.
No, I mean, I'm excited about this race. I do think that it's going to race differently this year than it did last year, so I wouldn't take last year's race too terribly heavily. Like, I know we said Logano won it, and these guys finished there, which is true. But like, am I locking in Logano because he won last year? No, he's still tough to read. He still had so year this year on the short tracks. Yes, it's a different package, but when I do the playbook, I will reference the similar tracks and their histories there, which is New Hampshire, Phoenix, and Richmond. Cody Zeeb and I on the NASCAR Gambling podcast talked about this earlier in the week. You can go listen to that too. I would build for a couple of different. Either one guy's going to lead a bunch of laps, or they're going to split them. Either you're gonna have a bunch
I would
of
probably lean on the side that it would just be split, because we just still haven't seen. And granted, even though Ryan Blaney was the most dominant car, and if there were half as many cautions as there were last week, he probably leads a lot more laps.
Right.
The issue is that William Byron was winning the race off pit road, and he was just getting cheap laps led just under caution. But that could have been an even more dominant performance from Blaney.
Correct.
All right. Well, Matt, thank you so much for your time. Best of luck to you this week. We will be on the lookout for the NASCAR DFS playbook on fantasyalarm.com. So best of luck to you, and best of luck to the FA Nation.
Best of luck, FA Nation.